with our phones, and we're looking at this interactive New York Times site. Right now it says it's dead even, and it's a 50-50 toss-up. Doug McElway is with us. Doug, what do you think? What's going on there?
Well, the latest here from the Jones campaign is that I just spoke to Giles Perkins. He is the campaign chief for the Jones campaign, and he is deeply encouraged by results coming in from Jefferson County, which show a turnout of anywhere from 40 to 50%. That is much higher than the Secretary of State of Alabama had predicted earlier this week, where he said that he thought maybe a turnout of 25% would be in order. Jefferson County is Alabama's largest county. Birmingham, where we now stand, is its seat. And what makes this so appealing to the Jones campaign is that a lot of Luther Strange voters voted for him in Jefferson County, according to Perkins, that is. We did notice a much larger crowd late this afternoon in the place where Doug Jones voted himself. A lot of young soccer moms, a lot of affluent young families, sort of moderate GOP families, who were turning out in droves, much larger numbers than we saw at other polling places this afternoon. So perhaps that is a good omen for Doug Jones. Another bellwether county to watch out for here in Alabama is Talladega County. It's just slightly north and slightly east of the midsection of the state. It is significant because it is a microcosm of the demographics of the state of Alabama, with a white population of about 65% and an African-American population of about 32%. If African-Americans turn out in large number in Talladega County, it could be a bellwether of their turnout across the state, and that bodes very well for the Doug Jones campaign. Sean, back to you.
All right, thanks so much. And by the way, as we bring in our panel here, joining us now with reaction, we have American Conservative Union Chairman Matt Schlapp, Salem nationally syndicated radio talk show host Larry Elder, from the Hill, Joe Concha, Fox News contributor, former Clinton pollster Doug Schoen, and Fox News contributor Tammy Bruce. Right now it's 54%. New York Times has it. I mean, it's bouncing around like a ping pong ball, and we're all sitting here neurotically looking at all this. It really matters. Vote turnout, specific counties. He mentioned Talladega County. I'd say another county, having lived in Alabama, would be Madison County, a bit of a bellwether, northern Alabama. Certain counties, obviously in the north, Roy Moore's going to want to run up the vote as much as he possibly can there. In the Birmingham area, some certain Democratic areas, the same with Doug Jones. What's your take, Tammy?
Well, look, I think that one of the big benefits Roy Moore has is the history and the infrastructure of the Republican Party. There has never really been, I think, a competitive race there between the Democrats and Republicans for a couple decades. You also have, they know Roy Moore. What some things may surprise basic Americans not in Alabama. It doesn't necessarily surprise the people that know that man and his family. So it is about infrastructure. It's about getting out the vote. And right now, Roy Moore and the Republican Party have that edge.
All right, let me bring in our own Britt Hume, elder statesman. He's seen a campaign or two, also a close friend of ours. Britt, thanks for being with us. Let's talk about the national implications for a minute. Britt, I know the Republican establishment were dead set against supporting Roy Moore. At the end, they ended up coming in. The president went in, but not in the state. He went close to the state. He also pointed out that for him, with a Senate margin of 52-48, going down to 51-49 becomes intolerable and means you almost need the entire Senate Republican caucus to pass a bill.
No, that's true, Sean, and indeed the Republican leadership in Washington remain divided over Roy Moore's candidacy. The president, and with him, the Republican National Committee swung behind him, but the Senate Republican leadership did not, nor did the National Republican Senatorial Committee, which is an important source of support for any candidate running for office. So the division there remains, Sean, and there's very great worry among Senate Republicans that Roy Moore, if elected, while he would be an ally on many issues voting, would be a problem for Republican candidates running for Senate next year, because the Democrats will be claiming that they disposed of and disciplined all of their alleged sexual offenders, and here's Roy Moore, who against whom charges are still hanging, who is accepted in a part of the Republican Party. So that's the dilemma they're worried about, and obviously they can't win either way, Sean, because either they lose the seat or they gain what they think may be an anvil around their necks.
If Roy Moore would have pulled this out, and it's very tight according to all exit polls and all the numbers we're seeing early on here, if he were to pull this out, we know the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has a 10 a.m. scheduled conference with all the Republicans there. if they decide to do an ethics investigation, if they would then aggressively go after Roy Moore and perhaps look to overturn the results of this election, what would be the impact, the results? How would the people of Alabama feel?
Well, I think the people of Alabama, or at least those that voted for Roy Moore, would be furious. I don't think there's any question about that. So that's the kind of calculation that these Republicans in the Senate would have to make. Is it worth it? Is he enough of a burden to them as they seek to maintain their majority next year that it'd be worth the candle? And, of course, you know, this is only a special election. There'll have to be a regular election going forward. Alabama remains an overwhelmingly Republican state. And I think the belief among Senate Republicans, Sean, is that had they nominated either Mo Brooks or Luther Strange, that either of those candidates would be way ahead tonight instead of being in this close race that they might lose. I might add, Sean, you may recall back last year on election night, I kept quoting the betting odds put together by our colleagues John Stossel and Maxim Lott, who have a website where they keep track of these things. Yeah. Right now, their betting odds have Moore 73%. Jones 26%. That's what the betting odds are showing right now.
All right, let's throw our money down. You may recall, of course, last year when everybody was scoffing when I was quoting them early in the night last year, and the betting odds turned out to have it right before anything else. I'm not saying that's true here, there
but
were a couple of us that were a little ahead of the curve and thought Trump had a much better chance than other people. But good to see you, Britt. We always appreciate it. We'll check in with you later in the hour. Let me go to Doug Schoen. From your perspective, let's talk about the national implications here.
Look. If the Democrats win the seat, and right now it is a toss-up exactly as you suggested, but if the Democrats win, they will take this as a mandate to go after Donald Trump and to make it a referendum on Trump and more. They will expand their map to states like Arizona and Nevada next year, and the Senate will be in play. I think this is, in my terms, specifically a referendum on Roy Moore. But I don't think that's how the Democrats will react if, and it's a big if, Doug Jones wins.
If Roy Moore loses, it would be because of Roy Moore. He has been notorious in running very close statewide elections. Last election for state Supreme Court, it was 52-48. And in Alabama, that's a close race for a Republican.
I understand that. But this is going to be nationalized to a rejection in part of Trump because he came in, did the robocall, the rally in Pensacola, and it will embolden the Democrats, rest assured.
Will it be that, Joe Contra, or will it be that even with Trump's help, he couldn't pull him over the finish line because of all the news and information we've been discussing now for a long time?
All the news and information we're discussing for a long time. If Roy Moore ends up winning or ends up losing in this case, this will be an election that was decided ultimately by one news outlet, and that's the Washington Post when they did this story a couple of months ago. If this story doesn't come out, this isn't special coverage right now. The race is already called. Roy Moore wins in a heavily Republican state. Here's the thing. The story was never debunked. The Washington Post did good, solid vetting in terms of the accusers, and Roy Moore never could push back the way that he wanted to. So ultimately, this is a race that's being decided by a news outlet, by the Washington Post, and what they did a couple of weeks ago.
There's a little lag on the numbers on the screen here. Right now, Jones is up about 1.2%. Now the New York Times has flipped it to a 57% chance of Jones winning the race as this thing goes back and forth throughout the hour, depending on the counties that are coming in at these specific times. Let me go to my friend Matt Schlapp. Matt, I want to ask you this question. After Roy Moore had said he did not know the woman, and then the woman came out, there's one particular case with the yearbook. I interviewed on my radio show that day a 42-year professional forensic handwriting expert. He said, with pinpoint accuracy, 100% accuracy, that if he had Roy Moore's writing at the time and he had the yearbook, he would be able to determine if, in fact, Roy Moore had written that inside that yearbook. He also said he would be able to tell if the ink was old or the ink was new. From that point forward, I always assumed forensics would decide whether or not the veracity of both sides here. We since found out that at least the notes on the bottom of that yearbook were added by the woman in question.
That's right.
It never got any forensic testing. What does that mean for the race, and what does that mean? Why didn't that happen for the people of Alabama? I thought they deserved it.
Yeah, I don't think Gloria Allred wanted that to happen. And I think this is why, Sean, it's a tough thing for the voters in Alabama. You know, life is filled with imperfect choices, and I think voters, including Republicans and conservatives, are faced with an imperfect vote here as well. And look, Roy Moore was attacked by establishment Republicans inside D.C. from the very beginning. They're not he's not their kind of candidate. So it's not surprising that as these allegations came forward, they moved further away from him. But Roy Moore, even in Alabama, it's really important tonight for Sean, for us to get one thing clear. Alabama is Trump country. You can look at any poll. Trump is overwhelmingly popular in Alabama, except in these exits, which I think could be dubious. And so this is really a question about Roy Moore, who in 2012, when he ran, won by about 3.6%. He has always been a polarizing figure, even in Alabama. And I think tonight, if he pulls out a victory, the counties I see coming in, there's about 15 key counties that are swing counties that he either narrowly won or lost in 2012. He's overperforming in a lot of those counties. So right now, I think the New York Times is a little askew in saying and giving those percentages on the race. I think Roy Moore is overperforming now, and I think a lot of voters, Sean, here's the interesting thing. Funny, they didn't want to tell pollsters what they were going to do.
2016, because it was way over here that, in fact, Hillary was our next president. Then slowly but surely, it went the other direction. Let me bring Larry Elder in first. Larry, your take on the vote tonight. A lot has been mentioned about the percentage. We always break things down demographically. The black vote in Alabama, how high that percentage would be. In 2012, Barack Obama had 28% of that vote. There were some estimates coming out early tonight and predictions that the black vote would even be higher than that number. Possible, or
That's right.
Your thoughts?
It's entirely possible. This has been a very emotional race. And you know, Sean, Alabama is my mom's home state, and I spent a number of summers there. She's actually from the Huntsville area. In my opinion, the question is real simple. Is this the hill for Republicans to die on? I know that Roy Moore is very popular among Donald Trump supporters, but the question is, are these allegations to be completely dismissed out of hand just because Roy Moore is our guy? And I don't think people ought to be embarrassed about it, the fact that they voted for Donald Trump, even though he had allegations against him. Donald Trump did not run against Mother Teresa. He ran against Hillary. And Hillary had serious allegations against her, up to and including that she verbally intimidated an alleged rape survivor, Juanita Broderick. So I don't see any reason why this had to be the hill for Republicans to die on. I thought Trump hit the right note when he backed Luther Strange, and then he through his support to Roy Moore after Moore won. And then when the allegations came out, Trump said, if they're true, he ought to drop out. And then Trump kind of sat out. And then he did a 180, made a cost-benefit analysis, I guess.
I think the president was very specific, Larry, in as much as he's saying, hey, it's a tight margin. We can't get health care through the Senate at 52-48. If it's 51-49, then the agenda that he has pushed so hard for is in greater jeopardy.
I understand, but that agenda is in jeopardy long term if you back somebody who, in my opinion, is morally dubious. They're cutting the commercials already. Whether Moore wins or loses, they're going to go after Trump regarding these allegations.
Well, that's true.
If Roy Moore wins, they're cutting the commercials already. Anybody that stands near him, anybody that shakes his hand, anybody that waves goodbye is going to be tarred with Roy Moore's moral issues. And I think it's not a good calculation going down the road. I could very well be wrong, but I think they're making a mistake.
75% New York Times has odds of of Doug Jones winning.
You realize since we've been on the air, it's been 18 minutes. It went from Moore up to slightly to Jones, and now Jones has a 75% chance of winning, all in the span of 18 minutes. That's remarkable.
It's remarkable, and it's based on the data and where the data is coming from, Doug, something you've done.
Yes, and there's one other thing that you asked me before about national implications. This will put tax reform in dire jeopardy if, in fact, the Jones campaign is victorious, because we already have one vote in Senator Corker who's gone, and that also allows us to have one other potential Republican defection to knock out the whole effort.
And this is a test for the president. I think what you've seen with Shelby going against it, Jeff Flake giving money to this guy. I think the Republicans in the House, in the Senate, want to lose the Senate. I think they want the president's agenda to fail, and the only way to really achieve that is to suddenly become the minority.
Tammy, that is a profound a deeply troubling thing you just said.
We saw that through this. I mean, this is one of the things, regardless of who wins this, and at this point it looks like it might be Mr. Jones, is that remains the issue, that this is why this is occurring. And I think part of the GOP base, if not all of us, should be extremely concerned about the nature of what the GOP establishment has done in this process. And I agree with Larry. Look, as a feminist, I'm outraged that this also happens to be our choice, right? But the fact is that the future of the country is at stake. This is larger than Roy Moore. It's about our families in the future. But this is also a sign of how awful things have become under the establishment and how much work we have to do.
I have talked, Matt Schlapp, at length about these forces that are against President Trump, the deep state, the Democratic Party. They don't want him to succeed. The media is obviously more corrupt than they've ever been. But I also add to that list Republicans, and I add to that list the never Trump crowd that wants to say, see, we told you so. But meanwhile, what this last election was about in 2016 is the forgotten men and forgotten women that need jobs, that are on food stamps, in poverty, and they want a shot at the American dream also. So if that is the Republican strategy, I mean, it almost takes my breath away. And it also goes, I think Mitch McConnell has a lot of culpability in all of this. I was a Mo Brooks supporter from day one. I've known Mo Brooks nearly 30 years. He used to fill in my radio show when I had a show in Huntsville, Alabama. And I thought he would have been a great candidate. The person that came out strongest against Mo Brooks, Matt, was Mitch McConnell.
That's
Mitch McConnell, you know, literally put himself in the middle of the race time and again, and it didn't work out well for him.
Mo Brooks was the forgotten candidate in this race, Sean. I mean, he was clearly the person who could have won. Luther Strange was always hobbled for all kinds of reasons, including his participation in what some would see the whitewashing of the governor scandal. So Luther Strange wasn't going to get there, and it took D.C. swamp Republicans to play this in every way that was wrong. You know what's interesting, Sean? After spending $25 million, you think they would have done some significant opposition research to see the themes they could have pushed. And I think at the end of this, you're right, which is they can't say Donald Trump is an anchor weighing down the party because his poll numbers, according to certain polls, are down, when the poll numbers of D.C. Republicans are much, much worse in every poll you look at. Let's face it. D.C. Republicans are not very popular, and what I would say is they have to have some humility on these questions. If we lose this race as a party tonight, we have to have some humility about how we handle these primaries.
You know, one of the exit poll numbers that stood out on the page, Larry Elder, had to do with Donald Trump really not being a factor in this race. But in terms of the liberal media, in terms of the Democratic Party, in terms of the spin that will go out tomorrow, and I think Doug is right about this, you know, if the dog bites, if the bee stings, if you're feeling sad in the world of the liberal media and destroy Trump media and the Democratic Party, it's all Donald Trump's fault. So, of course, they will put him in the middle of it when really Trump, yeah, he got involved and he sent a robocall in, but he didn't go into the state, did he?
That's true, but a significant percentage of voters in Alabama who are voting for Roy Moore said that they're voting for him to show their support for Donald Trump. Look, Trump's going to be president for Trump's going to be president for 7 years, Sean. And in that course of the 7 years, he's going to have to deal with a Congress that hopefully will remain Republican. And you saw what they did with Todd Aiken years ago when he made that comment about legitimate rape. Imagine what they're going to do with Roy Moore. And I believe that they're going to use Roy Moore as the face of the Republican Party and threaten the majorities in the House and in the Senate. And Donald Trump's going to have a hell of a time governing down the road for the next 7 years if he loses control of both chambers as a result of Roy Moore being the face of the party, which is exactly what the Democrats will do.
Is Roy Moore the face of the party? I mean, there's a 76% chance, according to the New York Times right now, that he doesn't win.
Well, if he doesn't win, that's a whole different ballgame, but they'll still nail all the people who supported him, who ignored, in their view, his moral transgressions.
And Conyers and Menendez, and I can go down the list.
And really, Jackie Spears says that there are 260 settlements in that shush fund, sexual harassment, racial discrimination. You've got maybe about, what, if those are all individual cases, half of Congress, a quarter of a third of Congress. So this is Mitch McConnell. Who knows? Is he on that list? We don't know because there's no transparency. That is the albatross over the neck of Congress, not Donald Trump.
That will be Republicans and Democrats, I can assure you. Doug, real quick, we got to take a break.
Yeah, in '96, we had the benefit of Bill Clinton running against a Republican
But you know
Congress.
what? Up to and including last year, your party defended, not you, your party went all in defending and all the smears of every woman.
I'm saying it could help Trump get reelected in 2020 if he's running against a Democratic House and Senate.
This is a fascinating race. All right, we'll take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll continue to monitor all the election results out of this close race in Alabama. Brett Baer, Martha McCallum, they'll join us as we continue our coverage. All right, this is a Fox News alert. It is still too close to call in the special election in Alabama as these election results continue to pour in. Joining us now with analysis, Brett Baer and Martha McCallum. They are in charge of our election coverage. Brett, let's start with you. Your thoughts about the evening tonight so far?
Well, Sean, first I want to start with the Fox News alert that Sean Hannity has cited the New York Times about 5 times in the last 5 minutes. I think
Really?
that should be noted.
Shocking outcome tonight.
It should be noted somewhere.
Really? Thanks a lot.
Sorry.
I really appreciate
No.
that.
I'm sorry. But to be serious, our decision desk says at this hour, Doug Jones is leading in Alabama. It's too close for us to call this race at this moment. But just take that in for a moment. A Democrat is leading in deep red Alabama and could very well win this race. And we've talked about, and you've talked about, all of the allegations and how this all factored in. One thing I want to correct, and that is that if Jones wins or Moore wins, it's unlikely that they'll be seated until January if the government doesn't shut down, because the Secretary of State in Alabama will push this process until December 26th. Right now, we're funded, the government is, until the 22nd. If they manage to strike a deal, that person won't be seated in the Senate until January. So the vote on tax reform would still be Luther Strange's to make.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the big stories, at least at this point, Sean, is turnout. And it looks like in several of the large counties, white voter turnout was not what it would need to be for Judge Roy Moore. Now, we don't know yet. We watched this thing flip back and forth, as you've been documenting over the course of the evening. But it looks like that could be an indication that, perhaps he's had some problems, at least in some of those counties. And it goes clearly to the issues that were brought up by the Washington Post and the allegations that were brought against him, and whether or not that caused some people to stay home from voting, Sean. And I think it's worth pointing out that in the current climate, Roy Moore is one of the few who fought against those. He was pushed, he was nudged to get out of the race, to make room for somebody else. He chose not to do that. And at the end of the night, there'll be a sort of decision based on whether or not that was a good idea when we see what the outcome of this race is. But clearly, that's at the center of what we're watching unfold tonight,
Brett,
for better or worse.
Let me go to how we got to this point, Brett. And by that, I mean, I've known Mo Brooks for nearly 30 years. I mentioned earlier I lived in Huntsville. I was a local radio host. He used to fill in on my radio show. I will tell you tonight that Mo Brooks would have won by probably 20 points in this race. We also have the factor of Richard Shelby, a sitting senator, well-liked in the great state of Alabama, and he said he could not vote for Moore, and he went with a write-in candidate. But how did we get to this point? The president supported Luther Strange. And I think a lot of people aren't really talking about the involvement of Mitch McConnell from the get-go here, opposing Mo Brooks, who would have won easily, supporting Luther Strange, and the amount of money they poured in to also going hard after Roy Moore prior to these allegations.
No, you're right. And the establishment line in Alabama plays really against the GOP establishment in Washington. McConnell was not an asset there. The money was, of course, but when the president decided to support Luther Strange, it seemed like that possibly could turn the tide, but it didn't, because the overpowering message was, shake things up. The GOP establishment is not getting it done. You need somebody closer aligned to Donald Trump. And Roy Moore made that case better. He also had a high name recognition, Sean, as you know, from the Ten Commandments fight and his time, a number of different elements and issues in Alabama. He had high name recognition, whether or not Steve Bannon was campaigning for him or not.
I think there's one other factor that we've got to throw in here. Statewide, if you look at the prior race that he had for the Supreme Court in Alabama, Martha, it was 52-48. That is, by Alabama standards, for a Republican, that is not a big win.
No, it's not. And he's proven to be a controversial person, of course, over the last many years. There wasn't a lot of establishment support for Roy Moore, Sean, before this whole story broke in the Washington Post about these young women and his relationships, whatever the nature of them was, over the course of 40 years ago. So he's always been a firebrand. He's always been a controversial character in that. And it really comes down to the question of whether or not Alabama voters want him representing them in the Senate. And when you look at the numbers in terms of the polls that we have, Sean, and how important being pro-life is to voters in Alabama. The fact that they may, and we're still waiting for the final numbers, be willing to send Doug Jones instead of Roy Moore, that says quite a lot.
Yeah, all right.
A lot of new voters tonight, Sean. So what we're seeing is new
and young voters were going more Democrat in this particular race. But Doug Jones, right?
Overwhelmingly.
Definitely.
And when you have new voters who haven't voted in 2016, 2014, they're motivated by something. And it might have been, the get out the vote effort by the Jones campaign. Remember also, they spend a ton of money, the Democrats did. Outside money, campaign money, big money for the Democratic Party to get this seat. A seat that's only 2 years, really. You talk about 2020 is the next election for this particular seat. So if Doug Jones pulls this out and he's leading at this moment, it will be another race in 2 years in deep red Alabama.
And also that money would never have poured into this race had it not been for the allegations against Roy Moore. That was what fired them up. That's what got Joe Biden in there, President Obama in there, doing robocalls. So these allegations were a huge fire start for Doug Jones.
All right. Thank you both. By the way, Brett, do you like the big, colossal studio that Martha has now? Mine's tiny by comparison.
It's really nice.
It's got stairs going up to the tippy top. It's got fancy. Martha's name on this big circular thing.
When you put the New York Times graphics behind you, that's what
the New York Times loves me. If you saw the Sunday Magazine picture, it's probably the best shot I've ever had.
Today, Sean.
All right, guys, thank you.
Thanks,
all right,
Sean.
Coming up, we'll continue to monitor these election results out of this close race in Alabama tonight. Huge breaking news. Fox News has obtained the anti-Trump, pro-Hillary text messages between that FBI agent, the one that's involved in everything, Peter Strzok, and his girlfriend, Lisa Page. That's straight ahead. All right, this is a Fox News alert. We are awaiting results. We may be able to make a call soon in this all-important Alabama U.S. Senate special election. We'll have an update in mere moments when we get those numbers. Also, major breaking news right now. Fox News has obtained the anti-Trump, pro-Hillary Clinton text messages between the FBI agent, Peter Strzok, and his girlfriend, Lisa Page. Remember, both working in the Mueller special counsel case. But first, President Trump's attorney, Jay Sekulow, is now calling for a second special counsel to be appointed to investigate the massive conflicts of interest surrounding a key Department of Justice official and Fusion GPS. Now, the company behind the Clinton bought and paid for fake Trump, anti-Trump propaganda from Russia. Well, that dossier, this comes after a Fox News exclusive report showing that, in fact, the wife of Bruce Orr, the recently demoted DOJ official, actually worked for Fusion GPS during the 2016 election while it was crafting that fake news dossier. Now, also tonight, the fake news media, they're working overtime by spreading outright lies, misinformation to try and damage and discredit President Trump. Here are some of the recent examples. On Friday, CNN, they ran wild with a fake news report about Donald Trump Jr. claiming that he received an email on September the 4th, 2016, that gave him special access to hack DNC emails that were not released at that point by WikiLeaks. That was a total lie because the email was sent, that was actually sent from September 14th. That was the day after WikiLeaks had published the DNC emails. Also fake news, CNN, they were pushing that story for hours. And others like Conspiracy TV, MSNBC, they repeated it before the Clinton News Network finally offered a correction. And over the weekend, the Washington Post reporter Dave Weigel tweeted out this fake news photo and claimed that the arena was empty during a Trump rally in Florida. Turns out the photos, well, they were taken well before the president even stepped on stage. And why Weigel in this particular case was forced to apologize, it was an outright lie. The New York Times published a story claiming that President Trump watches up to 8 hours of TV a day and drinks 12 Diet Cokes. Huge news. Now, CNN has since been using that so-called report to wildly speculate about President Trump's health in a pretty despicable display. Last week, both Bloomberg, Reuters, they put out the fake news story that the special counsel, Robert Mueller's team, had subpoenaed President Trump and his family's bank records from Deutsche Bank. Now, President Trump's legal team quickly pushed back. And by the way, those outlets also issued corrections. And finally, of course, there was ABC News' Brian Ross. He was suspended without pay for reporting that Lieutenant General Michael Flynn was prepared to testify that then candidate Trump ordered him to contact the Russians. That turned out to be false. He's also forbidden forever reporting on Donald Trump going forward. Joining us now with reaction, the attorney for President Trump, Jay Sekulow. You were involved today. I actually saw your text messages to NBC where you said you're not calling for a special counsel to be appointed for Robert Mueller at all. Correct. You said it 3 times in that same text exchange.
Right. So here's what you had. I mean, Sean, this was a really straightforward situation. When the news broke yesterday about Bruce Orr and the conversations he had with Fusion GPS and Chris Steele, which, by the way, supposedly was done without knowledge of those in authority over him, although he was very high-ranking, the fourth in the line of authority at the Department of Justice. We then find out that not only is he meeting with Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele, who wrote the fake dossier, but that, I mean, you cannot make this stuff up, that Bruce Orr's wife was working at the same time for Fusion GPS and was their expert on Russia. So we said, when we saw this yesterday with my colleagues, we discussed the issue and decided that the best course of action here in our view as the lawyers was that a special counsel be appointed, as, by the way, Chuck Grassley has stated, as has Lindsey Graham stated, to look into all of this because, as I said in my statement, the conflicts of interest inside the FBI and Department of Justice as to this Fusion GPS matter is breathtaking in scope. Now, NBC got that. I was clear, as you saw, 3 times in an email, a text exchange with the main reporter on this, and then NBC runs and says the story exactly opposite. I said, this has nothing to do with Bob Mueller. We've been cooperating with Bob Mueller. I'm very encouraged and I'm very, not only encouraged, I will tell you this has been one transparent administration when it comes to what's been done here and what's been provided to the special counsel. And I'm very convinced that we're going to have a successful conclusion. Having said that, I never said a word, Sean, not one time,
just the opposite,
about a special counsel for the
You said just the opposite, Jay.
Exactly the opposite. And that is, again, I asked them to retract the story. They did in some of their news reports, but one of the MSNBC hosts took what was said incorrectly by NBC, ran with it, and still to this moment has not retracted it, although he's put what my full statement is. But this is, you put that on top of Deutsche Bank, the fake picture from the packed rally in Pensacola, the incorrect statements from CNN on the, as you mentioned, on the whole situation, on those emails with WikiLeaks and getting the date wrong with supposedly 3 sources. I want to just tell the American people tonight that we are going to give you what's actually happening here, and you're seeing it in unfortunately play out before your eyes. But the good news is I am very encouraged that we'll be bringing this to a successful conclusion.
Let me bring up what this breaking news that we have tonight. Let me set the table a little bit. We know Bruce Orr, literally 4 doors down from Rosenstein. We know that he was meeting with Fusion GPS. They're the firm that was hired. They came up with the false dossier, hired Christopher Steele, just to give some background. Turns out now his wife worked for Fusion GPS. Now here's where it gets worse. Peter Strzok and his girlfriend, Lisa Page, both of them working in just Peter Strzok in particular. He was in the dossier case. He interviewed Cheryl Mills. He interviewed Uma Abedin. He interviewed Hillary Clinton. He was there for the interview with General Flynn. It seems like the FBI only has one full-time employee because he's involved in all of this. I am looking at the text messages that have now been released where his girlfriend is calling Donald Trump a loathsome human being, where they are praising Hillary Clinton. These are people that are supposed to be involved in an objective and fair investigation of individuals. Now, we know in the case of Uma Abedin and Cheryl Mills, they both lied. They were in charge like General Flynn. In other words, we have a case where Peter Strzok, James Comey, literally were writing an exoneration before the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email. Let's talk about it.
Well, I mean, first of all, Peter Strzok was, by Robert Mueller, was taken off the case, and apparently, and none of us know this for fact, this was the reason. So that's one question right there. He was, by the way, supposedly one of the leading counterintelligence FBI agents in the Bureau, but he was taken off the case and has been reassigned to Human Resources. So obviously there was a concern that the special counsel had with regard to his capability in moving forward on this in an objective manner as it's supposed to be under the law. But you laid out the James Comey matter, and here, Sean, there's another aspect of this that tends to get overlooked, and that were 16 witnesses were given immunity by the FBI and Department of Justice in the whole investigation on the emails, and he wrote that exoneration letter before the interviews of those witnesses took place. So, explain that. You can't.
You can. You could say the fix was in. And Peter Strzok was involved in this. By the way, God, Hillary should win, $100 million to zero. I guess we know where his political affiliation lies.
Yeah, but here's the biggest point, though. I mean, from a legal standpoint here, Sean, this is what's significant. Because of this, apparently, he's removed. But look at the issue in a more global sense. Why is it that the Federal Bureau of Investigation, there are a lot of great agents out there, we know that put their lives on the line every day for all of us, our families. But why is it that when you go back to the Bruce Orr and the dossier, did that dossier, for instance, serve as the basis for FISA warrants, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrants?
Why can't we get an answer? Great question.
Well, we should be able to get an answer. I think the Attorney General owes the American people an answer on that. And should give it forthwith. And, of course, Congress has subpoenaed to get answers on all these questions. But I want everybody to think about that for a moment. You had a FISA warrant that may have been issued on a dossier that was with all of this Nicene aspects going on here. And at the end of the day, you have to say, how is this allowed to continue? Why are these people not terminated? And you know what the answer to that is? And people don't like when you say it, but it is the deep state. It's the bureaucrats. Because you know what they haven't talked about, because there's no evidence of it? The president talking with Russians, meeting with Russians, meeting with Russian, all the Russia talk that's taken place now for a year, as this has now been, fully vetted.
There's
nothing
collusion
there. But you know what?
There was a Hillary Clinton bought and paid for dossier with Russia lies, propaganda to influence the 2016 election.
Yeah, but take it right back into the Department of Justice, Sean. And how is it that the fourth-ranking DOJ official wife works for the company that's putting together the dossier? And that should just be okay? Because the media, believe me, the media would not have covered what happened today on this unless NBC would have put out the incorrect statement. This would have gotten no attention. I mean, James Rosen did a great job of reporting it, but it wasn't getting play at all. And now it has to because of NBC's incorrect statement.
All right, Jay.